Today, it's all about caffeine. Many people have come to know caffeine as this magic elixir that will help to wake them up in the morning and give them a boost of energy. However, if not used properly, caffeine can have detrimental effects on your sleep at night. And if you don't get good sleep the night before, it's going to set your day up the next day for disaster. A lot of people will rely on caffeine to get them going even if they don't get good night's sleep. However, that can have a detrimental effect. And in this video, I'm going to be discussing the science behind what happens when you consume caffeine, how that can affect your body, and how that can affect your sleep at night. Welcome to Be Well Healthy Living. My name is Tara, and I'm a Master Certified Health and Wellness Coach. Today, I'm going to be discussing 4 facts how caffeine functions in your body and how it affects your sleep. Number 1, blocks adenosine. Adenosine is something that's naturally occurring in your body. It is known for your sleep drive, and that is what is responsible for making you want to fall asleep. That's what's responsible for making you tired. Now, the way it works is that throughout the day, adenosine will build in your body. As you get closer to evening time, when it's time to go to sleep, you're going to have a lot more of that adenosine in your body that's going to give you a strong desire to go to sleep. Now, provided that you actually had a really decent and good night's sleep that night, you should wake up with a normal amount. However, sometimes if you don't sleep well through the night, you're going to wake up especially groggy because you have quite a bit of adenosine left in your system. Now, the relationship between caffeine and adenosine is that caffeine blocks those adenosine receptors. So your body can no longer tell you that it's tired because caffeine is that block for it. Well, you think, well, that's a really good thing, right? But if you didn't get good night's sleep before proper sleep, you're going to still have that adenosine lingering in your body. It's just that your body can't sense it because the caffeine is blocking those receptors. So what happens is that throughout the day you have your caffeine in the morning. When that caffeine will fade off, that adenosine is still there. So you're going to still feel sleepy along with the extra adenosine that you've built through the day. So then you're going to feel extra tired as that caffeine wears off. And this is where it sets you up for trouble because most people, when they're tired, they're going to want to grab those quick energy bites, those high carb, empty carb items that are full of sugar and that's going to make you crash. It's going to cause blood sugar spikes. Or you're going to grab another coffee, which has more caffeine, which is later on in the day, which is closer to bedtime. And that's going to cause problems that I'm going to be discussing in the next important fact. So while adenosine is what is responsible for making us feel sleepy and feel tired, what happens as we get good sleep at night, that adenosine converts to ATP. And ATP is essentially the energy currency that normally runs through our body. So as we are awake in the day, so we wake up, that ATP, if we got a good night's sleep, we should have a bountiful source of it that we can utilize for energy throughout the day. So anytime we exert physical energy or even brain mental energy, that is going to deduct that ATP from your so-called energy account, and that converts to adenosine. So as your ATP drops throughout the day, your adenosine rises. So it's kind of like this at the same time. So as you go through the day and you're exerting energy, remember, it can be both physical and mental. Some of the times that I felt the most exhausted, the most tired, when I was exerting brain energy. When I was learning a second language, I was spending much of my day speaking this second language. And for those who are born with that gift, you're very lucky because you don't realize how much brain power goes into it as an adult trying to learn a second language. I was always so exhausted, always so tired because I was exerting so much brain energy. So if you're exerting a lot of, if you're studying and you're doing a lot of work where you are doing brain energy, that too can consume that ATP. Now remember, as your ATP lowers, because that's the energy that's in your body, your adenosine rises throughout the day. So by the end of the night, if you're functioning healthy, your adenosine tells you it's time to sleep. And the beautiful thing is that as you sleep, it acts like a bank that converts that adenosine to ATP that you have the following day. Now, here's another thing. Have you ever noticed that sometimes it takes more and more caffeine to get you going throughout the day? Well, sometimes those adenosine receptors are upregulated, and so therefore it's going to need more caffeine to get you going throughout the day. So, I highly recommend if you choose to continue drinking caffeine that you cycle it. So you go through periods of time where you wean yourself off or take in less caffeine than you normally would. And then that way the caffeine will have a more powerful effect. So, for example, I like to be as decaffeinated as possible. I don't like to utilize caffeine every day. So that way, if I ever was in a position where I needed it or wanted it, like if I needed a time of some serious focus, or maybe I had a plane layover that has made me stay up all night, I know that I can utilize that caffeine in a moment of emergency. Now, it's not something I would do every day. However, I like to know that I can utilize caffeine for a great tool when I need it. But that won't happen if I'm consuming caffeine every single day. I hope this all makes sense. I know it's a little bit sciencey, but it's important to understand how caffeine works and why it's so important to not consume too much caffeine, because too much caffeine can block those adenosine receptors. You're going to need more caffeine over time, and you definitely don't want to have it in the middle of the day because it's going to block those adenosine receptors, which is going to block that signal that's telling you it's time to sleep and time to rest. And if there's one thing that you cannot sacrifice, it is good sleep. Good sleep is important for so many things like your immune health, your mood regulation, or repairing anything in the body for energy conversion. Because remember that adenosine will convert to ATP overnight as you sleep. So it's good for so many things, so many systems. Pretty much every single system in the body needs sleep to recover. So we cannot have anything that interferes with getting a good night's sleep. Number 2, half-life. The second important tip that I'd like to discuss is the half-life of caffeine. And half-life is a common term used in the medical field that it takes whatever time it takes to get something to be half of its efficacy in your body. So basically, if you take caffeine in the morning. Usually it peaks at like a half hour after you drink it. But caffeine has what's called a half-life of about approximately 5 hours on average. Now, what that means is that it'll take approximately 5 hours to be at half of its effects. So that means caffeine is still in your system even 5 hours later, not quite as strong as when you first took it, but it'll still be in your system at about half of what you took in the morning. I hope that makes sense. But why this is so important is because caffeine stays in your system for an extremely long time. Now, that number, 5 hours, is the average number. It could be a little bit less and it could be a little bit longer. In fact, the older you are, the longer caffeine stays in your system, which is incredibly key to know, because if you were to have a cup of coffee at 4 p.m., that cup of coffee can actually, by 9 p.m., you're barely at your half-life. So it's still going to take longer than that to actually exit your system. And remember, the reason why caffeine makes you feel more awake and disrupts your sleep is because it blocks those adenosine receptors that tells you that it's time to sleep. So now, as we go back to the half-life, remember the longer you go through the day, it's going to take that long time to actually get out of your system. Now, if you are going to consume caffeine, I do not recommend consuming caffeine after 12 p.m. And here's the reason why. If caffeine has an average half-life of 5 hours, it can actually take 10 hours to completely vacate your system. Now, if you drink it, let's say you drink caffeine at 12 p.m., 10 hours later would be 10 p.m. So you have to think in advance. If I drink this now, this is going to stay in my system for a long time and it's going to affect my sleep later on down the road. So if you are going to have caffeine, I recommend that you get it definitely before 12 p.m. And you want to get it earlier in the day, but not too early. And I'll be discussing that here in just a second. Number 3, cortisol. The third important fact that I want you to know about how caffeine affects your body is that we have this hormone called cortisol. Now, many of you have probably heard of cortisol as the stress hormone. And while that is true, it does produce in your body when you are under times of stress. There are actually times that cortisol works for you and it's helpful to you. And one of those things is during your circadian rhythm. Basically, it's that normal sleep wake cycle. Cortisol is good for you to have in the very, very early hours of the morning. Now, they say somewhere around 3 a.m. is when cortisol is the lowest, but it also starts to work in your system where it gently rises. And so, what cortisol does, you have a slow rise of cortisol in the very, very early morning. And the reason for that rise is to get you up, is to get you going. So, the cortisol peak is going to be the highest approximately about hour after you wake up. So remember, cortisol is designed to get you going, to get you from that sleep state to a wake state. So this is actually when it's a good time to have cortisol running through your body. So what happens when you have caffeine first thing in the morning, right after you wake up? Let's say you wake up and then you have caffeine the first thing in the morning, and this is why it's so bad, is because you have that natural cortisol curve. You have that natural cortisol rise, and then if you add caffeine to the mix, caffeine raises cortisol. That's why if you're going through times of extreme anxiety, it's best to reduce caffeine if you're going through very difficult times of stress. But if you have that caffeine added onto the cortisol that you already have, you're just going to build more stress. You might get those jitters. You might get more anxious in the morning and that anxious feeling, and then that's going to raise your blood pressure. And so it's best to wait an hour to 2 hours up after you wake. So that way you're going to get through that normal cortisol peak. And then when that cortisol drops, then if you have caffeine, then you're going to actually pick yourself and boost you. And it's not going to mess with your adrenals as much. So I still recommend to be as caffeine free as possible. But again, if you're going to drink caffeine, remember to time it, to delay it until after your normal cortisol production actually starts to decline. And too much caffeine could actually hinder that cortisol elevation in the morning, whereas you're not going to produce as much cortisol because your body's going to depend on that. And so that can actually alter and have detrimental effects on your adrenals. And we don't want that. We want to be as natural and as close to how our bodies are naturally designed as possible. And what happens is if you don't have that normal cortisol production, if you don't have that normal cortisol rise in the morning, you're going to come to depend on that caffeine, and you're going to need that caffeine to get you going. And then that is that vicious cycle again. So the best thing that you can do is to have as little caffeine as possible. And I'm going to be discussing in just a minute about how much caffeine I would recommend if you are going to continue drinking caffeine. Number 4, GABA inhibitor. And the fourth final tip that I'd like you to know about caffeine is that caffeine is a GABA inhibitor. And what GABA is important for doing, it's an anti-anxiety. So it helps us give us a more calm, a more peaceful effect. So if you drink too much caffeine, you're going to block that GABA in your system. We want our moods to be as calm and as stable as possible. There's too many people that are on edge all the time. They get too angry at the silliest things and their moods will go off. And the last thing we need is to have people more on edge. And so that GABA is going to help to regulate our moods a lot better. And when we have a more regulated mood throughout the day, it naturally will get us into sleep at night. Now let's talk about how much caffeine should you be consuming. I do not recommend more than 200 milligrams a day. Now, safely, I believe they say that you can have up to 400 milligrams. However, that's just too much for me. I would probably say that a safe place to be to not disrupt your sleep is to have no more than 200 milligrams in the morning. Now, remember, have that caffeine about an hour or two after you wake up, but before noon. You don't want to have it after noon because that's when it's really going to affect your sleep because of that half-life, that very long half-life. Now, 8 ounces of coffee has approximately 100 milligrams of caffeine. So that means that you could have 2 8-ounce cups of caffeine or 2 8-ounce cups of coffee in the morning. Now, what is it? Here is 8 ounces, and I put about approximately 8 ounces in a little cup. Here's a standard coffee cup. Sometimes it's a little bit bigger. So if I pour this in here, It is probably about 2/3 of the way full. It's not even a full cup. Now, if you do add creamer to your coffee, you could probably put a little bit in there and it'll fill the cup up just a little bit more. So remember now, if you're going to take a standard coffee cup and you're going to fill it up all the way, you're actually getting more than 8 ounces of coffee, which is more than 100 milligrams. So if you fill this up to the top, you'll probably get then closer to 300 milligrams. So you have to be aware of just how much coffee you are going to have if you're going to do coffee. So decaf coffee actually has a little bit of caffeine despite the name. It only has about anywhere from 3 to 15 milligrams of caffeine per 8 ounces. So just remember that if you do drink decaf, it still has a minuscule amount. It's very, very small. Also be aware of how much caffeine are in teas or caffeinated beverage. Soda has caffeine in it. It has but a little bit less than 100 milligrams of caffeine per can, I believe. And so there's that. There's also energy drinks. Be careful with energy drinks. Those are highly caffeinated and those are most often consumed in the middle of the day. So you have to be careful about the half-life and when you're consuming that caffeinated beverage, that caffeinated energy drink, because that has quite a bit of caffeine on top of it having sugars. So it's not a really healthy thing. And I recommend getting off of those energy drinks if you possibly can. You might need to wean yourself off because that's a lot of caffeine. So you might need to wean yourself off and go slowly. Getting off of those energy drinks is one of the best things that you can do for your health. I know I've talked a lot about some sciencey stuff here. There's a lot to take in. However, this is something that I will be discussing again over and over and over because this is something that's so key and so important to overall health and wellness. Like I said in the beginning of the video, sleep is one of those things that we cannot sacrifice. Even no matter how busy we are, no matter how much we're doing, we cannot sacrifice sleep because sleep is where our body repairs itself. It's where we get more energy. It's where our immune system can fight things off and we won't get sick as often. It helps with mood regulation. It helps with so many things, so many systems in our body that we cannot afford to sacrifice good sleep. Now, the average person does need about 7 to 8 hours on average. Now, again, that's just the average. Sometimes people will take a little bit more. Sometimes people can get away with a little bit less. But on average, you need quite a bit of sleep to get you by for a good, healthy night's sleep. I hope this video has given you some valuable context to how caffeine can really disrupt that evening sleep that we so desperately need. It's important that you understand how your body works. So that way, when you get that midday crash, when you get that midday wanting to take a nap, you understand the whys behind it. So you have the power to control it. You have the power to change it if you understand how the body works and functions. If I have provided valuable content, I would love if you like and subscribe. Also, do me a favor and comment below and let me know if there were any particular facts that stood out to you that you're going to remember going forward. So, thank you so much for watching. Peace, blessings, and good health, and I'll see you on the next video. Bye-bye.